Hermann Göring, president of the Reichstag and chief of the Luftwaffe High Command, mounted the stage above a fanatical crowd of his compatriots at the Air Ministry building on January 30th, 1943. Göring stood tall at the podium, the weight of his medals pressing against his chest, their gleam sharp and defiant in the morning sun. This was his moment, to restore faith, to reassure the people that Germany's power remained unshaken, despite the tightening grip of defeat. He inhaled, ready to speak, as the fanfare of Großdeutscher Rundfunk, Germany's state radio, cut through the air. The crowd leaned in, breath held in anticipation. Then came the sound, distant at first, but growing with terrifying speed. A deep, thunderous drone froze the blood in Göring's veins. His eyes shot wide, hand gripping the podium. At that moment, he knew. For the first time in the war, enemy aircraft were on their way to Berlin. A broadcast of power. January 30th, 1943, marked the 10th anniversary of Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist Party's Machtergreifung, their rise and seizure of power. However, after a string of crushing Allied victories, the Nazi regime's once unshakable claims of invincibility were rapidly unraveling. In North Africa, Axis forces found themselves trapped in a tightening vice as British and American armies advanced from both the east and west. Simultaneously in the east, the German Sixth Army lay encircled in the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, serving as a grim testament to the catastrophic failure of Nazi ambitions. Despite these setbacks, the regime proceeded with plans to celebrate its decade of dominance. The day was proclaimed a grand occasion, a moment to glorify the supposed strength of the Reich. Yet, while Nazi leaders prepared for speeches in Berlin amid the carefully choreographed fanfare, the war raged on, and the tide was turning against them. Meanwhile, in Britain, as plans for the next move were being discussed, news arrived of the Nazi celebratory broadcasts. The reaction was swift. Amidst the discussions of how best to respond, a bold idea quickly took shape. Send a noisy, uninvited guest to crash the celebration. An audacious plan was set into motion for a daylight raid on Berlin, an operation never before attempted. The first direct daylight attack on the German capital would demand precision and courage. The raid would serve two purposes: demonstrating the growing power of Allied air forces and delivering a devastating blow to Nazi pride. The prospect of embarrassing the Nazi leadership while sending a clear message of Allied resolve made the operation irresistible. At RAF Marham, a key Royal Air Force base located in Norfolk, England, 2 Mosquito squadrons were scrambled for the high-stakes mission. These 2 units were the first to fly the Mosquito Mark IV, a speedy, versatile twin-engine bomber armed with up to 2,000 pounds of bombs and Browning machine guns in the aircraft's nose. The weight of the mission hit hard. Not everyone shared the enthusiasm. Sergeant Richard Lofty Fletcher, apprehensive about bombing a city in broad daylight, later recalled, quote, "I was playing cards in the crew room when my driver first told me we were going on an op. I must admit I was a bit shattered when I found out it was Berlin." The thought of the risks, both moral and physical, weighed heavily on him, knowing that a daylight raid on Berlin could bring civilian casualties and expose them to devastating enemy fire. Göring's speech spoiled from above. A meticulous flight plan was set. The Mosquitoes would skim the ground at 0 feet to evade radar, then climb rapidly to 25,000 feet, relying on their 400-mile-per-hour speed for protection. 105th Squadron was tasked with hitting the target at 11 a.m., time to coincide with Hermann Göring's speech. As the first Allied pilots to attack Berlin in daylight, the tension was palpable. The idea of flying deep into enemy territory without the cover of night caused many to skip their usual pre-flight meal. At 8:50 a.m., under a blanket of thick clouds, the first 3 Mosquitoes screamed into the sky. Squadron leader Reg Reynolds and his navigator, Pilot Officer Ted Sismore, led the charge, followed closely by Tony Wickham and his navigator, Pilot Officer William Macon, with Flight Lieutenant John Gordon and Flying Officer Rafe Hayes bringing up the rear. The takeoff at Marham was rough. rain splattering against the windshields, visibility poor. But the crews pushed through the elements. Low-level flight was the order of the day as they skimmed the ground, their engines screaming over the Dutch coast, skirting danger with every turn. At Nienburg, just northwest of Hanover, the pilots gunned the throttles, lifting the aircraft into a steep climb. With fighters always a threat, they scanned the skies warily, knowing the nearest cloud cover was too low to hide them. Reaching 25,000 feet, the trio of Mosquitoes raced toward Berlin. Just before 11 a.m., Göring stepped onto the stage. He adjusted the microphone, his face a mask of forced confidence. The gathered crowd hushed, the air thick with anticipation, as the Reichsmarschall prepared to speak. At precisely 11 a.m., the fanfare of trumpets blared from Großdeutscher Rundfunk, signaling the start of Göring's speech. The crowd below erupted in anticipation, unaware of the incoming threat. Suddenly, without warning, the RAF Mosquitoes appeared, slicing through the sky like ghosts. In a heartbeat, they released their 500-pound bombs. The explosions erupted in a deafening roar, shattering the calm and drowning out Göring's voice, sending shockwaves through the city and tearing the Nazi celebration apart in an instant. Reichsmarschall Göring once boasted that no enemy aircraft would cross German borders. Those words now hung like a bitter irony. The deafening thud of bombs falling nearby rattled the Haus des Rundfunke, the headquarters of the broadcaster, just 4 miles from the state radio building where the celebrations were supposed to take place. The building shook to its core. As the blast reverberated, the studio engineers scrambled in a blur of urgency. Air raid sirens howled, and the staccato of anti-aircraft fire echoed through the walls. In the midst of the chaos, the engineers faced a harrowing decision: continue broadcasting Göring's speech, riddled with the noise of enemy aircraft and explosives, or cut to silence, effectively muting the proud Reichsmarschall. The moment stretched in intense tension, the silence slipping away as more bombs exploded in the distance. Finally, they made their choice. Without explanation, the first mournful strings filled the air, soft and haunting, followed by a deep, resonant brass, its notes heavy with grief. The engineers had chosen to play the funeral adagio from Bruckner's Seventh Symphony, a stark, sorrowful contrast to the Nazi celebration as the city of Berlin trembled under the weight of the attack. As the explosions boomed amid the mournful adagio, Göring's voice faltered. His eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with fury. The interruption was clear. His speech, his moment of glory, shattered. He slammed his fist on the podium, incandescent with rage, humiliated by the audacity of the attack. With their mission over Berlin complete, Gordon and Hayes turned westward, throttling their Mosquito toward safety. The city faded behind them, but the danger was far from over. As they neared Bremen, flak batteries roared to life. Explosions erupted around them, shaking the aircraft as shrapnel slashed through the air. Twisting and diving, the Mosquito narrowly evaded bursts, the crew's hearts pounding with every jarring impact. Finally, the flak subsided as their speed outpaced the danger. Rattled but alive, they broke free. By 2 p.m., all 3 aircraft returned to base, completing the 1,100-mile mission. But Berlin had not seen the last of Marham's Mosquitoes. Goebbels and the Shattered Spectacle. After the bombers struck, the parades continued, but a faint unease rippled through the crowd. Still fuming, Göring climbed into his limousine for another engagement. This time, it was Joseph Goebbels, the Gauleiter of Berlin and Reichsminister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, who would deliver the major speech. Beneath a massive eagle and swastika, flanked by towering Nazi flags, Goebbels took the stage at the Schöneberg Sportpalast, Britain's largest indoor venue. Known for his masterful manipulation of Nazi propaganda, Goebbels was ready to whip the crowd into a fervor, reinforcing the regime's defiance despite the disruption caused by the Allied airstrike. At 1:25 p.m., a second trio of Mosquitoes, this time from 139th Squadron, took off from Marham, their engines cutting through the tension of the moment. Squadron leader Donald F.W. Darling, with navigator Bill Wright, led the formation. Close behind was Kiwi Flight Sergeant Peter McGeehan and Flying Officer Reg Morris, while Sergeants Joe Massey and Lofty Fletcher followed. Their target was clear: Goebbels' speech, a Nazi propaganda spectacle. They flew low across the North Sea, skirting Heligoland, and then crossed the Schleswig-Holstein Peninsula. As they neared the Baltic coast, just past Lübeck, they were deep into enemy territory, 160 miles from Berlin, preparing for their strike. This time, the German defenses were on ready alert, waiting for the British bombers with a variety of anti-aircraft flak guns primed for action. The crews of the Mosquitoes, undeterred, pushed their engines higher, climbing swiftly to 20,000 feet and veering above the clouds to avoid detection. As they neared Berlin, the city appeared below, bathed in brilliant sunlight, its calm and beauty in stark contrast to the impending storm. The RAF Mosquitoes closed in. The first blare of alarms echoed across Berlin, urgent and shrill, signaling that the enemy was near. Radar stations blinked with frantic readings. The incoming raiders locked on to the screens. In an instant, flak batteries sprang to life, their crews working with chilling precision, loading high-explosive and fragmentation shells and preparing for the inevitable barrage. The city braced itself. At precisely 4 p.m., McGeehan and Morris hit the release button, sending 500-pound bombs screaming toward Berlin. One detonated with a deafening roar half a mile south of the city's center. Simultaneously, Massey and Fletcher unleashed their payloads, explosions rocking the southwest as the air thickened with smoke and debris. Their explosions rocked the ground as Goebbels stepped to the lectern, the commencement of his speech interrupted. The rattled staff at Haus des Rundfunke, despite the chaos, made a split-second decision to continue the broadcast, capturing the pandemonium live. The sound of air raid sirens, mixed with the distant rumble of explosions, punctuated the Nazi propagandist's desperate words. All around him, the capital of the Reich's defensive machine was faltering under the weight of the RAF air assault. With the initial bombing done, 2 Mosquitoes surged homeward, their engines howling, as they relied on speed to escape enemy airspace. Gunning for safety, McGeehan and Morris spotted 2 Luftwaffe FW-190 interceptors closing fast. With a split-second decision, they initiated a hard evasive maneuver, banking sharply and pushing the Mosquito to maximum speed. They tore across the Dutch coast, skimming the waves at treetop level. Flak erupted, deafening and furious. Tracer rounds sliced through the air, narrowly missing the tail as they darted over the Frisian Islands. Meanwhile, Massey and Fletcher flew steady at 15,000 feet, scanning for danger. Suddenly, a Focke-Wulf FW-190 appeared, diving fast. With split-second precision, Massey slammed the controls, sending the Mosquito into a thick cloud bank. They dropped to a low level, weaving desperately. After a tense few moments, the fighter lost them. They emerged, shaken but safe. Hearts pounding, both aircraft raced back to Marham, touching down just before 6:30 p.m. Mission accomplished. Just barely. There was still a third Mosquito, the last to release its bombs. Darling and Wright soared over Berlin's skyline, the 500-pound ordnance falling with pinpoint precision. But as the bomb descended, disaster struck. A violent jolt rocked the Mosquito. Something had hit. The aircraft bucked, smoke trailing from its wing as the engine spluttered. Darling, at the controls, fought the yoke, trying to stabilize the craft, but the damage was too severe. The Mosquito tilted wildly, its altitude plummeting. Below, the landscape blurred as the ground rushed up in a fatal spiral. With a deafening howl, the aircraft tore through the air, hurtling toward Altengrabau. The impact was catastrophic, a fiery explosion, marking the end of the flight. Darling, just 24, and Wright, 34, were lost instantly, their daring mission cut short in the skies over Germany. A victory of impressions. The speech-stopping missions not only taunted Nazi leadership, but also provided critical intelligence, flight times, defenses, and fuel consumption rates that shaped future raids on Berlin. However, success without wanton innocent bloodshed was never certain. As pilot officer Ted Sismore later recalled about the difficulty of succeeding in this mission without taking too many lives, quote, "It was a very difficult decision of what to drop and how much to drop." In the end, the victory would not be counted in bodies, as only dozens of Germans had reportedly lost their lives that day. But it was a victory of perception and propaganda, especially on Hermann Göring. Looking back on the events of that day, he is noted to have blustered, quote, "The British, who can afford aluminum better than we can, knocked together a beautiful wooden aircraft that every piano factory over there is building. They have the geniuses, and we have the nincompoops. After the war is over, I'm going to buy a British radio set. Then at least I'll own something that has always worked."